Hello there, friend. Today, I want to talk about how to cultivate connection and community. I think this topic is so important because I speak a lot on personal development, and whilst a lot of emphasis is put on personal responsibility, which I do think is really, really important, I think we often leave out the part which is to do with connection, community, and how much those things make a huge impact on our life as well. And for me personally, I wouldn't be where I am or be living the life I'm living or even care to probably live the life I'm living if it wasn't for those around me. My community, my connections, they are what make it all worth it. And I feel like, especially in this moment in time, I've seen a lot online. It seems to be there's this loneliness epidemic going on, especially with younger people. And I think a lot of that is fallout after the pandemic. People kind of forgot how to socialize. Things have got more expensive. The economy, all the rest of it, community now more than ever is really, really important. And so I think it's important for us all, myself included, to occasionally be reminded we need to water those seeds of community and connection in order for them to grow. Welcome to this new episode of Voicenotes from Samio. I am very excited to get into this one because I've often touched in previous episodes on the topic of friendship and relationships. And it's something really important to me. It's something really dear to my heart because I really, really value my friendships, my relationships, the people in my life that just get me through the day to day. They bring me so much joy, and not only friendships, but connections full stop with other people. I feel like there's so much value in that, and we can learn so much from others and so much about ourselves as well, and find so much joy in these different relationships and connections. So I think the first thing we need to get into is that we need to be willing to inconvenience ourselves. And this is so real. And I think it's a really important one to touch on straight from the get-go. Because whilst I'm someone who talks about protecting their peace, putting themselves first, focusing on what they value, which all of these things I think are super important, I'm also very careful when it comes to my wording around other people and relationships, because what I don't want anyone to do is think that the goal is to isolate themselves or cut everyone off in their lives so they just have no problems and no issues. When it comes to community and being around people, it's not always going to be easy and it's not always going to be great. I am not saying you should stick around people who are toxic, who are causing you major problems and trouble in your life. Absolutely not. However, we need to be careful that when it comes to protecting our peace, we're not putting up so many walls that we're just shying away from everyone and we're just avoiding anyone that disagrees with us or has different opinions about life. And so coming back to the willingness to inconvenience yourself, I think it's important to think about how we approach relationships, connections, and community and what we expect from them. Because there's been this rhetoric going around recently. I've seen it on TikTok. I really wish now that I'd saved some of these TikToks because I feel like some of the wisest words I actually hear on that app. This is what happens when you decide to do a video on a whim. Anyway, I've seen a few people discuss this idea that everybody wants a village, but nobody wants to be a villager. And I really do think it comes down to this idea of not wanting to be inconvenienced. Now, I'm just going to reiterate, I do think it's really important to discern when people shouldn't be in your life or you need to distance yourself from certain people because they're genuinely not good for you. But I also think we need a level of give and take with this, especially when we're trying to cultivate community. Chances are that you're not going to see eye to eye with every single person in your life all the time. And the larger that community or quote unquote village, the chances are you're less likely to get on with everyone. But there's still that sense of these are my people, this is my community. And if shit hits the fan, I've got you. And of course, many people can have this by default with family, but I also think this can extend to people in our wider community, be our neighbours, friends, people we meet along the way. And so if you really want to build and cultivate that community, be it closer friends or, like I say, neighbours and the like, you do have to be willing to occasionally be inconvenienced. And I'm not talking about bending over backwards. I'm just talking about the willingness to not always only do what you want to do or only do things when you can be bothered or when it's convenient to you. And so when we're building these self-care rituals and practices, protecting our peace, protecting our energy, putting our boundaries in place, we just have to be careful that we're not also building up really high walls that are stopping people from coming in if we're also looking to cultivate and grow that community around us. So I've made some notes, but they are a little bit frantic because this just popped to the top of my head this morning. And I was like, I need to speak about this because I've had some different episodes around friendships and relationships mulling around in my brain for a while now. So these are in no particular order, the things I want to speak about. But one of the first things that came to my mind, a way that's really easy to cultivate that connection with people, especially people you already know, or if it's a acquaintance that you're maybe trying to build into a friend. That sounds so build your own friend. You know what I'm saying? If you're trying to develop a friendship, I am the biggest fan of voice notes. Probably not a surprise because this podcast is called A Voicenotes from Samio. And actually, the inspiration behind this came from the idea that I wanted to create my own community online, share my own ideas with yourself, like I would a friend and like I do with my friends in real life. I will send voice notes and we'll just chat about anything and everything. And I found it's a really good way to keep in touch when you're not able to keep in touch, because ultimately, human IRL connection will always be top tier for me. But you know how it is. Life can get busy. People live in different areas. It's not always feasible or easy to just see your friends or community on a regular basis. And so I feel like voice notes give that human connection and that nuance of tone of voice that a regular schmegular text message could never do. In fact, not gonna lie, I don't love a text message. Text messages for me are convenient for planning something from getting to A to B. I'll meet you at this time here and see you then there. But if I want to know like what's going on, like a little catch up, share some ideas, some random musings, a voice note for me is where it's at. And then also it gives the other person the chance to reply in their own time without the need of being available there and then for a phone call. And I honestly believe it's something that's really helped me develop some of my, especially my newer friendships. It's really helped develop them to the next level. Especially when maybe we've not been able to see each other all the time. That has been a great way to do it. So if you're not into voice notes, maybe give it a try. It's actually so delightful when you receive a voice note from a friend. And you might have a friend and you've never done voice notes before. Try it out. Send them a little voice note and see if they send one back. And it could be the start of a beautiful new line of connection between the two of you, especially if it's not someone that you get to see all the time. And I think just hearing someone's voice really helps you to feel connected when you can't meet in real life. Now, I need to counteract all of that by saying, in real life, meeting up is so important. This needs to be top priority. I only put voice notes in there first because, this whole podcast is called Voice Notes from Samio. Plus, I think they're just a great way to just keep up with people, check in, and keeping connected. However, do not overlook the power of seeing your friend in real life. And I know we all know that this is the most valuable, but I've really noticed a shift in the zeitgeist, shall we say, over recent years. There's this idea that it's good to stay home or good to not do things. I watched a really good video essay on this once, actually. I can't remember whose video essay it was. Should get better at taking notes, but I found it really interesting because they actually touched on this topic and they theorized at the idea that people made it cool to stay in because it's harder these days to go out with like the cost of living and all of these things. That's a whole other topic for another day. But it really got me thinking how there's been this real cultural shift to staying home, cancelling on plans, and how it's almost been memeified and somewhat glorified in our society to not want to see people and not want to socialize. Again, many factors go into that, as mentioned at the start. But I think taking it back to the whole thing of how expensive it can be to meet people out and about these days and the lack of third spaces. I think this is where we need to really be open to just inviting people around to our house for really casual hangouts, almost like you would do when you were a kid, because not everything needs to be this grand event. It doesn't always need to be going for a dinner or going for drinks or these really planned, thought out things. I understand that there is a time and a place for those, and sometimes it is needed, especially when people within our community are busy, ourselves included. However, I am just like, bring back the energy of just popping round to your friend's house for a brew. In fact, I do that. Also, if you're from the US, a brew is a cup of tea or a coffee or whatever beverage of choice, usually non-alcoholic, but if the time is right, a wine may take your fancy. But generally, it's just like a chilled, casual, nothing fancy. I might be in the middle of folding washing. I might have a little bit of a mess everywhere, but it's fine. It's just your friend popping round for a brew. And I laugh at this because I say pop round for a brew. Anytime one of my friends comes around to my house, we might say it's going to be a few hours, but it generally ends up being all day. But I think we need to get back into romanticizing the days of the casual hangout. Think about the days when you were a kid. You would invite your friend over, they'd come and sit in your bedroom. They didn't care if it was a mess. They just wanted to hang out with you, chat, catch up. I spoke previously in my episode, Things Social Media Made Us Forget Are Normal. Wow, that's such a mouthful. In that episode, I talked about how social media would lead us to believe that everybody's home is aesthetic and perfect and tidy and put together all the time. And that is certainly not the case. And I've had to overcome some of my own levels of perfectionism by just letting my guard down and letting my friends come to my house when it's a bit messy. I'm not talking about dirty or like, some of the stuff I've seen online is a little bit cray-cray. But I'm just saying, if you've still got washing hung up that's drying, especially in UK homes, our homes are tidy. We don't generally have like full laundry rooms and stuff like that. If you have a maiden up, it's fine. Do you know what I mean? Your friend doesn't care. Air your dirty laundry. You'll be doing it over a little cheeky cup of tea anyway when you're having a gossip. But my point is just allowing your community, your friends, your family, whoever it is, to come see you in your space as you are. And if anything, it helps cultivate the connection because you're not putting on a pretense. It's just how it is. And then you can save the perfectly curated, tidy home when you've just freshly put everything together for when you have maybe like a dinner party or something like that. And I want to add that I know the reason some people struggle with this is lack of space. But again, that's when I think the casual hangout is really key because it doesn't mean having to host a whole dinner party and having space for a dining table and chairs. It can literally be just having your friend round to sit on your sofa and just hanging out. Do you know what I mean? Like sometimes that can be just as valuable. And when it comes to those in-person meetups, really practice the skill of actively listening. I feel like it is a skill that some of us could get better at learning because a big part of it is allowing other people to also feel seen and heard as much as it is about you sharing what you've been up to and you've been doing. And it might seem obvious, but sometimes that can be the difference of you making that deeper connection with someone or not. And a little sub point on this, I've also heard people talking about doing things as mundane as running errands with friends, which again, I think is a great way to just like catch up in a really casual way, whatever it is. But all I'm saying is let's amplify the casual hangout. And the next point is to actually organize get-togethers with friends. Whilst yes, the casual hangout can be great, like I mentioned, it's not always feasible and it's not always easy, especially with friends who maybe live further away or have busy schedules or different time schedules to your own. It's not always easy to just slot in a casual hangout here and there. But having planned in get-togethers, like this is one of my favorite things to do, whether it's in the house or out of the house. And I might be a grown woman of 34, but I am not too old for an adult sleepover. In fact, I saw someone talk about this online as if it was an unusual thing to do. And I was like, is that unusual? Like I still do that. Get your friend over, have snacks, have a little wine if you want, put some music on and just chat the night away. And the best thing when they're staying over, there is no time limit and it's great. And then you can wake up the next morning, make some breakfast, chill. It's like being a teenager all over again, but you just happen to be a woman in your 20s, 30s, maybe even 40s and beyond, who knows? And even just planning stuff that you like to do. Like for me, I do like going out. I do like to go for meals. I do like to go for drinks. And I'll plan these things ahead of time so that they will actually happen. Of course, it takes two to tango. I always use that line. so much when it comes to relationships. And it also has to be reciprocated by the other person. But I think when you get in that flow of organizing things with a particular friend, or maybe even a new friend that you're developing a friendship with, usually it does tend to get reciprocated over time. And if it doesn't, then you can either raise it with that person that you would need a little bit more back from them, or you take the hint and move on if you think it's something that they're not interested in. But I think it's important that we actively make plans with people and actually do things with friends or developing friends. Because something else I heard someone say, which was just like, whoa, that is so true, is when you're just like constantly catching up with a friend and telling them about something that you did, it just becomes this weird game of catch up and you're not actually making any new memories together. And when I heard that, it kind of blew my mind a little bit. And I thought it's so true. And obviously, it is hard with some friends. Like, I literally have some really close friends of mine that live in a different country. So we can't always be making new memories. And in fact, with some of them, it's been years since we made in-person memories. So it does become more of a catch up. It doesn't make them any less of a friend. For those people in my life who are at least in the country where it is more feasible, we make sure that we put plans in place so that we can do things together, even if it means it's months in advance, but it means that you're continuing to cultivate that friendship and relationship and just keep watering that community. It's not always easy. I've said this before, like, I don't necessarily have a one big friendship group. All my friends, for the most part, are quite separate. Luckily, over the years, they've all met each other. So it is easier for me if I do want to do some sort of gathering with a group of people. I can bring them all together and they all mix like relatively well. However, it's not always feasible to do that. So I do find myself a lot of the time just like seeing individual friends at a time, which is harder when you have a lot of really close friends. And so for me personally, that's why it's super important to have things organized with certain friends and have things in the diaries so that we know that we will still get to see each other. And if you're someone who feels like you maybe want to expand your friendship group or community and you don't feel like you have a lot of people in your immediate inner circle, I feel like a good way to expand that sense of community and connection is to kind of, how do I word this? Mix with friends, extended groups. I think that's the way to put it. And what I'm talking about here is those scenarios, such as like when you're invited to a get together, a birthday, a celebration, those kind of things like weddings, birthdays, these sorts of celebrations that we have going on. That's when you can mingle with, the word mingle is so weird, isn't it? That's when you can cultivate extended relationships. And I'm not talking about like stealing your friends' friends and being like, bye, they're my friends now. Do that if you want, but don't underestimate the value of friends, because whilst they're not necessarily your immediate friends, if they're people that you might see on a semi-regular basis, even if it's like once a year for a particular friend's birthday, they are still in part a part of your extended community and can really give you that feeling of connection and community when needed. Because community isn't just about the people in your inner circle, it's about that extension of community and even that sense of belonging and connection within a wider group. A perfect example for me is like one of my oldest friends. She loves her birthday. Like every year it's like, okay, what's she doing for her birthday now? Like we have done a lot of stuff, be it going on a night out all the way to going abroad on holiday. We've had a lot of fun over the years. And so through that, I have connected with her friendship group, so much so that I've been away on holiday for another girl's birthday within the group. And so whilst they're not necessarily my friends as such, and I'm like okay with that because we've each got our own friends and I've got other people that I'm really close with, I do enjoy seeing those people. They are extended community and extended connections. And so they're not people I see all the time. It could be like once or twice a year. But when we do have those celebrations and gets togethers, whether it's for my friend's birthday or something else, I know I'm going to have fun with those people. There's a sense of community. There's memories there from past gatherings and get togethers and that type of thing. And so that openness to connect to people and friends of friends can really lead to that extended community. And I also think with this one, you just never know who you're going to meet. And I think that's one of the wonderful things. Once you are open to it, your community or extended community can go so far and wide, and you can meet so many interesting people. And also, when it comes to that extended community, it's not just about friends or friends of friends. It's also just as simple as the community on your doorstep. The definition of what comes to mind for me of community, just your neighbours, the people around you. Like, when was the last time you said hi to them? Do you know their names? For me, I'm fortunate. I know the names of my neighbours. Saying hi to your neighbours, whether they are the ones on your street or just like in your neighbourhood, that is so big for building that sense of connection and community. And I feel like it's often overlooked because we can think like, how well do we know our neighbours? Do we even need to know our neighbours? And it's not necessarily about that, but I know personally, when I've said hi to a neighbour on the street, especially a neighbour in my immediate vicinity, I just feel that a little bit more connected to my community. And now, don't get me wrong, I am someone who has occasionally in the past, quite often actually, proclaimed how much I don't like small talk. And I think actually I'm going to go back and eat my words because I think we need to kind of move past that a little bit because all friendships start with small talk. And I'm not saying you need to make friends with your neighbours. You don't need to be buddying up with them unless you want to. But I don't think we should completely shun small talk because small talk is often the stepping stone to actual friendship, unless you're like me and small talk usually lasts all of 5 minutes. And then we go straight in with the deep stuff. I'm a fan of that too. But no, it's not always feasible. And in fact, I was looking back at some old footage the other day for a video that I was editing, and I found a clip of my friend Kat and I, who like now we are so close. It's crazy. But when we first met, we actually connected through her podcast because she invited me on as a guest. And I was vlogging, and in this vlog, it's like behind the scenes, and I'm like, oh, I've just recorded an episode with Kat, and I was voice noting. So many connections here. Voice noting Kat earlier, and I said to her, it was so funny watching this clip back because you could see how little we knew each other. And I could see the difference in our interaction because, when you're kind of getting to know someone, you may be a little bit more reserved or, the conversation is just different. The interaction is just different. I can't quite explain it. And it's just so funny because little did I know then how close of a friend she would be now and what great connection we would have. But that all began from small talk. We met at an event and it was small talk heavy, not going to lie, the first time we met. So much so that I don't think we spoke for about 2 years after. Then she invited me on her podcast. We obviously chatted for a while there, saw there was a connection, and then the friendship grew. So a bit of a tangent there. But my point is, you just don't know where small talk will lead you. And if you want to grow that connection, community, I'm sorry, but you're just going to have to suck it up and do it. And sometimes it can be awkward and sometimes it can be a bit boring. But going back to what I said earlier, if you want to build these connections and community, you have to be willing to inconvenience yourself because it doesn't always feel convenient to stop and have small talk. But going back to the talking to the neighbours, because we've gone off on a random segue there, I think having that connection in your community is really valuable because it also provides a sense of safety. And whilst you don't necessarily need to build these like really super strong bonds with neighbours and the like, just knowing that there's a level of reliability on each other because you've got that sense of community, like you'll look out for each other's homes. There's a neighbour that's took in more than a few of my packages over the years, not gonna lie, and that's great, and I really appreciate that. Just recently actually we were coming home and our next door neighbour had a fall and was quite badly injured, and we took him inside and like called the ambulance whilst we like waited with him until his family member could come. But gosh, if we hadn't have seen him and, he didn't feel comfortable enough with us as a neighbour to go in his house and we didn't have that sense of community, who knows? And so obviously that's just one example of where that can be beneficial. But I think just in general, it can be really valuable. And another one for me is dog walking. Not going to lie, I used to always say, I do not like talking to people on a dog walk. I'm like, I'm walking my dog. I don't want to talk to no one. And now I'm a little bit more open to it. Not going to lie, it depends on the mood. But actually, I have been pleasantly surprised. So I was out with my dog not too long ago, and we were on a field, and I met this woman that was a little bit older than me, and we got talking, our dogs were playing, and she was so lovely. We ended up talking about interiors, and she was showing me these pieces of furniture that she bought, and I really enjoyed the interaction, and I've seen her since, and she's like someone that I will happily stop and chat to. I don't know her, but she's a part of my community. She lives in my area. And so having that sense of connection to just people around your area can really give you a sense of belonging, and it can feel really good. And I'm not saying we have to stop and talk to everyone all the time because, we all lead busy lives, but sometimes it can just be as simple as smiling to a neighbour. And I'm going to be careful when I say this one because I know as a woman, it depends where you live. If you live in an area where you feel unsafe, it's not always feasible to just go smiling to strangers, especially if they look like a questionable character, because we've all had it where we smiled at the wrong person, then you're like, oh no, shouldn't have done that. But where it feels safe, because safety first, and where it feels comfortable, even just having that connection, because again, I see dog walkers or certain people all the time, and we smile and we say hello. We don't necessarily stop and chat, but I'm like, they're a community member, and if there was some sort of like urgent problem in the moment, I'd be like, I'd stop and I would help. But they're familiar faces. And I'm like, oh yeah, you're a part of my community. I'm a part of your community. I don't know you, but we're all regulars here. We're all a part of the same space. So I'm going to segue back to friendship here and cultivating the friendships that we do have. I told you this episode was all over the place. Very scatty notes today. It's also like the hottest day of the year so far. And to say I am warm is an understatement. Whew. Anyway, we roll. I think one of the biggest factors in building connection is allowing yourself to be vulnerable. Now, I will say, be careful with who you allow that vulnerability with. Maybe not Julie, who you've just met on a dog walk. But when it comes to friendships or friendships that you are trying to develop and cultivate and grow, and it could even be friendships that you've had for years, but you feel like there's more there, like you need to get under the surface a little bit. Vulnerability is the key to doing that, because in order to build authentic, deep and meaningful connection, we need to allow people in. And this can feel scary, especially if you're not used to it or if you've done it before and you've got burnt in the past. I would always say, proceed with caution. But then, like I mentioned earlier, it's not about building up all those walls and never letting anybody in. And of course, I say it's not simple because it's not. It can feel really, really scary. It can be really hard. But actually, the more we practice it, the easier it becomes. And taking it back, way, way, way back to my earlier point about just having people just come into your space, not random people, but having friends come into your space when it's maybe not preened and polished, and just the casual hangout. Even that is a form of vulnerability because you're not trying to show any sort of facade. It's just like, this is me as I am. And I think just being real with people and telling them where you're at in life. Like, I have had some of the biggest shifts in friendships over the years. And I'm talking friendships that I have had for years just by allowing myself to be vulnerable, because I understand that we get used to being a certain way with people. So we might have friends that we've known since childhood. And if we've never bothered to connect on a deeper level, it might be just easier to kind of carry on the same. And so it can take one of you or both of you to break the cycle. And usually, like 9 times out of 10, it will be reciprocated. And again, going back to what I said earlier about protecting your peace, of course, it is important to discern who is worthy of your time and who isn't, but also realizing if you do want those deep connections with people, you are going to have to allow a level of vulnerability. But I think the main thing that being vulnerable can do is it can allow you to feel a lot less lonely, because it really does deepen that connection, especially when it's reciprocated, if the other person shares vulnerabilities. And oftentimes, things that maybe you worry about or you're ruminating about or whatever it may be, a friend or a peer or someone that you're trying to connect with, more likely than not, will have been through either the same thing or something very similar. And it can really make you realize you have so much more in common than you realize. And when you begin to be vulnerable with others and they begin to be vulnerable with you, it allows you to show up for them and for them to show up for you in ways that you maybe hadn't previously in your relationship. And so it means that you both ultimately get much more out of the relationship. And so this actually moves perfectly onto my next point, which is to show up for people. This heavily ties into the whole point that I made that I've seen people talk about on TikTok, which is people want a village, but nobody wants to be a villager. If you want a village, you need to be a villager. You need to show up for people. Again, it's not about being all self-sacrificial and just like doing everything for everyone at a drop of a hat over your own needs. But there does have to be a level of give and take. And it's also not about doing something and hoping for it in return. Because if you are, then that's not going to help with building that genuine connection. But it's just thinking like, how can you be there for people in your life? Whether it's as small as being there for the neighbour, do they need help carrying their shopping if they're elderly and you see them struggling? Is it a close friend? Are they doing up their house and need a hand with DIY? I don't know. The lists are endless. And these are all things that is important for me to remind myself of as well, because I try my best to be a good friend and show up for those around me and in my community. But I think we can all always do better. And it's not just about showing up when people ask, but showing up when you maybe think they need it, reaching out to people, checking in on them and offering help and genuinely meaning it. I think it can be so easy to say, oh, let me know if you need anything. But often people can be so afraid to take people up on that offer, especially I feel like in our Western society, things, for the most part, obviously not with everyone, but I think there's a lot of this real individualistic mindset, and it's just the way our society is. We all live in separate households, in separate houses. And whilst I'm not suggesting we all go live in one big giant house together, what I am suggesting is that we find other ways to cultivate and foster that sense of community by just lending a helping hand when others need it and being open to being available and being there for people and just checking in on people. And even though I said don't only show up for people when they ask, also do show up for people when they ask. It might not be feasible to go to every event or occasion under the sun, but especially if a friend gives you plenty of notice ahead of time and the request is reasonable. I think when you're given that courtesy and given that time ahead for a certain event or celebration, then as a friend, unless you have an actual valid reason of why you can't be there, then you should show up. I saw a TikTok not long ago and a woman was saying how a group of friends, I'm going to absolutely butcher the story now. What was the celebration? Some friends didn't turn up to her wedding. I'm sure it was that. Now I'm saying it sounds really dramatic because surely friends wouldn't not turn up to a wedding. Shocking behavior. But yeah, it was just really shocking. And I went to the comments and there was so many people who had been in a similar boat. And I just think if you value someone enough as a friend, you show up to that occasion. Like I say, if you already have plans and there is a reason that you can't attend, fine, but just tell them ahead of time. I have no problem saying no to something if I already have plans or I can't do something. I will just be honest right away. But don't pretend you're going to go and then cancel last minute with a headache, or even worse, just not even tell them and don't turn up at all. I think that's very poor behavior without any valid reasoning behind it. And so going back to that point, whilst I don't necessarily think you should do things in order to get those same things in return, I do think it's heavily a case of treat others how you would hope to be treated. And so if you want a village community connection, then treat people in the same way that you would like to be treated. And my last point that I want to touch on, because I've waffled on a lot and I am so warm, I need to wrap this up, is to ask for help when you need it. Now, I think it's important to say, take responsibility of your own stuff when you can, but at the same time, don't be there like absolutely drowning and don't think you can reach out to a friend or someone in your community for help when you need it, because ultimately that is a part of what community are there for. I do want to touch on a point, however, which I touched on in my previous episode, drama triangles and when you get sucked into certain roles. So if you perpetuate playing a victim and someone else is always a savior, don't do that. And if you want to see more of what I'm talking about there, you can go back and watch that episode. But asking for help once in a while is absolutely fine. And in fact, it goes back to that point of vulnerability. It's very vulnerable asking for help. It can feel kind of gross. And I'm not going to lie, this is something that I have had to work on because I thought I was a good friend because I'd be the person showing up for people, helping them when they needed it. But I often wasn't the person asking for help. And so on my end, I thought, oh no, that's fine because, I'm not any sort of burden. However, what I've realized over time is that people want to be able to reciprocate. So if you've helped them at some point, whilst, like I said, don't do things to expect it back, but at the same time, people usually want to repay the favor at some point in whatever way they can. And also, it creates a level of balance in the friendship because if you're always the one lending the helping hand, always being there, it does create a sort of power imbalance and it's not empowering for the other person. Whereas if they're also able to help you in turn, it only helps strengthen that connection because you're able to then both lean on one another. And it's that seesaw that you're both able to provide value to one another in different ways at different times. And another thing is, if you've ever helped anyone out, you will know that it does make you feel good. It's kind of a weird one because it can feed our ego in a weird way. But a good thing about it is then it does ultimately make us feel good and want to do it more. And so we should allow that of other people, allow them to help you in return. And asking for help can look like all different types of stuff in different scenarios. What I would say, and this also kind of adds to this community connection building, is learn from the person that you receive the help from. Obviously, this might not be feasible in all scenarios, but say, for example, I remember some years, it was literally years ago now, I had never had box braids before, and my friend offered to do box braids for me. And I was so grateful of her doing it in that moment. But I knew I wasn't going to keep going back to her every time I needed my hair doing. And so I remember kind of asking her some questions and learning a bit of the techniques from her. And then from then, I learned to do box braids myself. I actually went and watched tutorials. But even just her doing the process on my head and understanding like, oh, like she started here, it took this long. I had a little bit more of an understanding. So I was kind of being a student at the same time. So then I could kind of employ some of those skills when going forward and doing it for myself. And I think even when you go to someone for emotional help and they share advice, like actually taking on board what they say, not just asking for advice for the sake of it, and then letting it go in one ear and out the other, actually implementing some of what they share if you've gone out of the way to ask them for advice. But I could go on a whole tangent about this and I'm going to end up on another topic. So let me not ramble on too much about that. But I think one more thing I wanted to touch on within this of asking for help is on a broader scope of asking for help within your community. It can be really, really empowering for everyone. And depending on how many people, how many working parts in your community, it also gives everyone a role if you're then asking them for help. Because community is about everybody having a place, whether it's within your neighborhood, within your friendship group, or whatever the community space is for you. And so you don't want to be the one who's just doing everything or providing everything or being in control of it. It's like when you ask for that help and you give everybody a role, you also give everybody a voice. And so again, it creates that balance. It makes everybody feel seen and heard and just adds to that essence of community. Again, I'm going off onto a whole other point with this one, but I'm going to end things here because I could go on about this topic. In fact, as I'm speaking, I'm thinking of more and more things to say, but we're just going to round it up here for today. Maybe we can touch on some of these points in a future episode. But those were just some of my musings and some of my thoughts on how to build community and connection, because I find this topic not only super interesting, but also super important because there's so much value to be found in community. And I'd even go as far as to say that connection with others is pretty much the essence of what it's about to be a human. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please do leave it a like. Let me know if you have any thoughts in the comments below. I would love to carry on this conversation with you. As always, I have thoroughly enjoyed chatting your ear off. I will speak to you next time.